Good morning, everybody. And to begin with, I'd just like to apologise for the fact that my voice is a little bit hoarse today, and I may be to stop for the odd cough and sneeze during the course of my talk. I hope it won't disturb you too much. I'd just like to begin by making a general comment about religion in general. And when people talk about religion, they usually start at the top and work down. So people talk about their understanding of God or the ultimate reality and so on as being defining factors of their religious affiliation. In Buddhism, we start from the bottom and work upwards. So we start off with the basic human condition and look at how our lives are in my view. And with regard to this, I think it's very important that we make a clear distinction between belief and knowledge. I think much of the difficulties in the world between religions these days is that these two words are not distinguished clearly enough, and people who have strong faith in religious teachings often take that to be a form of knowledge, and so they say, I believe. How do you know that what you believe is true? Because the belief is so strong and so real to me, and it leads to a kind of circular reasoning. I believe because I know because I believe. In Buddhism, we take knowledge as meaning a direct experience of reality or of whatever level. So, as regards various religious teachings on the ultimate nature of reality and God and all these things, the first and most important thing to remember, I think for 99.99%, can you all hear me, by the way? Yeah. Is that we don't know. So I said, do you believe in reincarnation or rebirth? And probably many of you will say yes. But the important thing to not forget is that you don't know. So Christians may believe that Jesus died for their sin, to save them from their sins, but they don't know. And Muslims believe that Muhammad was the last and greatest of the prophets and so on, but they don't know. So I think a very humble way to start off religious dialogue is not from the top and to say all religions teach the same thing, they're all going the same place, and because that, quite frankly, is a point of view that comes from ignorance. People don't actually know that. But if we say that we have different beliefs, and we have beliefs because of this reason and that reason, and we're happy with our beliefs, but we don't know whether our beliefs are true. And you see, uncertainty for most of us is quite threatening, and many people look to religion for a sense of certainty and stability. But Buddhism is teaching the wisdom of insecurity and facing up to instability and looking very closely at the nature of our minds, particularly that part of our minds that wants everything set out very clearly, answers for everything that we can hold on to. So, in Buddhism, at least in the tradition in which I've studied and practiced, we leave aside all those things. It's rather like, let's say, bread or roti. Let's say bread. If you're trying to explain to someone who's never eaten bread before exactly what it tastes like, you won't be very successful. It's far more practical to tell somebody what the ingredients are, how the ingredients should be mixed together, how they should be cooked, for what length of time, what temperature, and so on, and let the person eat for themselves. So the level on the subject of happiness, I would propose that we don't really know what it is yet. We might have some experience of some kinds of happiness, but my first proposal here is that happiness is of a number of different levels. There's a hierarchy of happiness, and certain forms of the lower levels of happiness are compatible with the higher forms of happiness. Other forms of the basic level of pleasure and happiness are incompatible. So the wise person is one who is looking into this whole question of happiness, what it is, if there are different kinds of happiness, and what are the obstacles to happiness, and what are the means by which we can surmount those obstacles. So it's a very practical kind of teaching, saying that religion is not, or should not be so much about what you believe, but it's about what you do, how you speak, how you relate to the people around you, and how you use your mind. Because we've seen so many people so often in so many countries of the world who have very inspiring beliefs, but their actions, particularly in times of stress and difficulty, are not consistent with their beliefs. So this is, I think, more of a more important religious problem, rather than protecting belief systems. It's understanding the nature of belief and having adopted certain ideals, training and educating oneself in order to be able to act in ways which agree, which are consistent with those beliefs. Now, there's some teachings, some religious traditions are very critical and speak very harshly of sensual desires, the kinds of pleasure that we receive through seeing beautiful, attractive things, hearing beautiful sounds, enjoying pleasant odours and tastes and physical sensations and so on. The problem is if we just take a very negative attitude towards sensual pleasures rather than using our wisdom faculty, then often people can get very repressed, or they try to force themselves to refrain from certain behaviors. So it leads them to displace that energy into other areas, perhaps equally harmful, or else are able to maintain a certain standard for a certain length of time. and then completely let themselves go for a while, and then full of anger and guilt and self-aversion, try to make a fresh start. And this kind of cycle of restraint and indulgence is one that many people are familiar with. If we look at it from a different angle, and instead of saying, this is a wonderful thing, this is beautiful, this is really, really it, but it's wrong, it's bad, I shouldn't. But we take another attitude and say, is it really so wonderful as I think? If it is, it should stand up to some close analysis. Really look at the thing, the object of desire, and see whether it really fulfills us in the way that we would like it to do so. And I think through looking at the essential pleasures in this way, then the interest in them weakens to some extent. Of course, it doesn't mean that you become a complete unfeeling vegetable, but it does mean that rather than seeking sensual pleasures as a refuge in life, they become an additive or something which just adds a bit of spice to one's life, but without leading one into actions and behavior that one may regret and feel bad about afterwards. Excuse me. So some certain observations can be made. The very nature of our body and our mind means that we can't experience unremitting, constant pleasure for any great length of time. Our physical body gets tired, we need food, we need rest, and our body sometimes gets sick and gets ill. So if our happiness is exclusively or mainly bound up with things outside of ourselves, then we have a certain problem. The problem is that our ability to control and to manipulate things outside of ourselves is very limited. And indeed the effort to control and manipulate things outside ourselves to provide us with the kind of pleasure and happiness that we desire is very often a short path to neurosis. So we look at the drawbacks, the flaws in sensual pleasures, rather than adopting a certain attitude. They're wonderful, or they're terrible, or they're evil, or they're good. So let's just look at the experience. This is not a matter of religious belief. It's just looking, every one of us, whether we have a religious belief or not, we can look at our own experience. So what's it all about? How does it feel? If we desire something, it might be a new car or a new sari or anything, something that we really want. How does that wanting change our general experience? We can make certain observations, I think, quite clearly. In the case in which we are pursuing an object which is of interest to other people, then our sense of love and companionship, sense of identification with others as companions in birth, old age, sickness and death is much reduced, and we begin to look on others as competitors. So this change in attitude to other people who are pursuing the same kinds of pleasure is something that really needs to be looked into. The way our feelings towards people change, the sense of tension and fear that we're not going to get the thing that we want, and the various kinds of mental sufferings that arise in the pursuit of sensual pleasure should be included within our whole understanding of the role of sensual pleasures in our life. When we finally attain the object of desire, there is often a sense of joy, exaltation even. But again, it's interesting to look at to what extent that particular joy that we feel is the release of the tension we've experienced in the pursuit of that object. We gain the object, and then what happens? It's impossible to maintain that high, isn't it? Even if we were, let's say you were an art lover and you were able to purchase the Mona Lisa or the most beautiful painting in the world and put it on the wall right there, how long do you think you could sit and gaze at that painting and still enjoy it before you started to get a bit restless, a bit bored? And this is just part and parcel of experience, isn't it? You can't maintain the mind on that same high level for any length of time. The mind just can't do that. The nervous system can't produce adrenaline and all those chemicals that contribute to that high feeling for any length of time. This is human biology. This is the nature of the body and the mind. So even if we do gain something that we've desired and we're happy with it, still after a while we get used to it. Another often overlooked but central fact of human experience, we get used to things. And perhaps after a while we get bored with something which formerly gave us a great deal of pleasure. So if we look at the whole process from that moment of desire, search for the object, experience of the object, sense of familiarity, perhaps even contempt, also other feelings, fear of separation. You see, like in the very affluent cultures or affluent groups within a society, that they're experiencing the pleasures of possession, but often a great deal of fear and paranoia. You see this in America, the fear of being separated from the standard of living which they have been able to create in that country. So then there's fear of separation, and then inevitably there's a separation. So in Thailand, in monasteries, we teach all the local people who come to the monastery in the mornings or on the equivalent of the Sabbath day to chant every day in their homes a certain chant, which is to say, I am of the nature to age, I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to die, I have sickened, I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die, I have not gone beyond dying. I will become separated from all that I love and all that I love. So the idea being that rather than turning your back on the shadow side of existence and those things that make you feel a little bit afraid, that we face up to them and we remind ourselves every single day that sooner or later we're going to be separated from every single person that we love. And this is surely inarguable, that if you don't die before the people that you love, they'll die before you do. And thinking like that's not to make us morbid, of course, but to see the value each other. If you constantly remind yourself of the inevitability of death and separation, and the uncertainty of when it will occur, then I think you'll be less likely to get into foolish arguments about petty matters, and sulking and hanging out until you have a sense of being the victor in some kind of argument. And so life's too short. We don't know how long we'll be together. When I was a teenager, I had quite long hair, and it was a real problem at home. I had a lot of arguments with my parents, and I had a great urge to come to India, and at the age of 17 I left home and worked for a while, and then hitchhiked all the way from England to India. And in 1975 I was just driving across Chowpatty Beach yesterday, 1975. I remember walking along that beach as a young teenager. Subsequently, I went to Thailand and became a Buddhist monk, and was in Thailand for some 6 years before I returned to visit my family for the first time in England. And of course, by this time, my hair was like this, no hair at all. And so I remember sitting in the car, driving home from the monastery in the south of England where I was staying, that my mother said to me, you know, if I'd have known that you were only going to be at home until you were 17 years old, I would never have made such a fuss about the length of your hair. Funnily enough, at that very same moment, I'd been thinking to myself, you know, if I had known that I was only going to be with my parents until I was 17 years old, I wouldn't have made such a fuss about having long hair. You know? But it's always so easy after the fact, isn't it? You know, we can all be wise before the events and after, particularly after events. But it's being able to draw on that wisdom at the time when there are difficulties, which is the skill in life. So the question of sensual pleasures, I'm putting this at the bottom of my hierarchy of happiness, because it's so uncertain, uncontrollable, changing all the time, and it doesn't ever really fulfill you. The sensual pleasures, I think, very clearly are subject to what we call the law of diminishing returns. We see this, say, perhaps with the most coarse kind of sexual pleasure that derived from drugs. You take a drug for a certain while, receive a certain kind of pleasure from it, but after a while you don't get the same hit from the drugs because you have to increase the dose, and you get into this cycle having to constantly increase the dose just to maintain the same level of intoxication, and all forms of sensual pleasure, I would suggest, are of very similar nature. Now, we're certainly not advocating all of you to become monks and nuns and to give up all sensual pleasures, but what I am advocating is that you turn the light of attention towards that and to the role of sensual pleasures in your life, and to how much importance you give them, and in your search for happiness in life, what role they play and how central a role they play in that. Now, in Buddhism, we say that a slightly higher form of pleasure and happiness, which I'm sure all of you will know very well, that's the happiness of giving. And when we give, whether it's material things, whether it's time, attention to someone who's feeling, when we give forgiveness to someone who's hurt our feelings, or when we share knowledge and understanding with others, that's definitely a form of happiness, isn't it? And I think that although we call it happiness, just as we say we had a wonderful holiday and was very happy, there is, I always think, something that deserves it being put on a higher level. It's a purer form of happiness. And of course the happiness of giving is also bound up with the happiness of taking. This is something I had to learn as a Buddhist monk. As a Buddhist monk, I'm not allowed to touch money. I have no possessions, and in the monastery in Thailand, in the jungle where I lived for many years, no one has private possessions. Any donations are offered to the monastery are put into a central fund, and then you have any needs, you ask the abbot for them. You can't go anywhere unless somebody is willing to offer you a ticket. I came here to India because someone offered me a ticket, not because I could buy a ticket for myself. But then you realize that one way of giving is also giving people the opportunity to give to you. And I think for obviously very selfish people don't have a problem about being people doing things for them. But as you start to develop more spiritually, you get great joy in giving, and it can be very hard to receive. But the wise person is one who can give when it is time to give, and can receive when it's time to receive. And sometimes not being willing to receive, afraid of being a burden on other people, is a form of conceit rather than a form of goodness. So giving, sharing, I think is a wonderful part of life. It makes people very happy. So even very, very poor people often experience this form of giving. Before I came to Bombay, I've been walking through the countryside from Aurangabad and around Ajanta and Ellora in the traditional way of a Buddhist monk, just walking by myself and going into villages for alms food in the morning. And just so wonderful to see the response of Buddhist people, particularly out in the countryside, people who are so poor, most no possessions at all, but you can see they're just beaming and just absolutely overjoyed to have the chance to offer a few chapatis and some dal to a visiting monk. So this is a happiness that we can all cultivate very easily, I think. Of course, it's easy to give and to share to family members or people that we love, but for it to be a real spiritual practice, we have to expand that more and more, so that it's not in any way sort of partisan or a group kind of thing. Now, the joy of giving, I think, is probably not at all controversial. The next kind of happiness, pleasure I'd like to talk about is probably not so obvious, and that's the pleasure of leading a moral life. Now, in the theistic religions, had a real problem with morality in the last 100 years or so. In one respect, that when morality is considered to be conferred or given by God, when you find people who don't believe in the dogmas or don't believe in God anymore, then they don't see any reason why they should believe in morality. If it's the person who gives it doesn't exist. So this has been a big problem in the Western world, obviously. In Buddhism, morality is not considered to be a matter of commandments, and there's no reward and punishment idea. But again, we start off with the basic facts of human existence, starting off with the fact that no human being, to think, desires to suffer, even a little bit. And everyone desires to be happy. If you could increase the happiness in your life by even a little bit, I'm sure you'd be interested. So, from that, basic principle of morality is not harming. And that takes precedence above religious teachings and dogmas that don't harm. There are no exceptions to that rule. Now, an exercise I've done with children in Thailand is to say, okay, if you had a magic wand, you say, well, what kind of community, what kind of society would you like to live in? How would you like people to relate to each other? And almost everybody would say, well, I'd like to live in a way that people are friendly towards each other, people don't hurt each other, people don't abuse each other. You want to live in a community where you don't have to worry that your things are going to be stolen. If you're married, you don't want to have to worry about your husband, your wife running off with someone else, or someone else trying to run off with your husband or your wife. You want to be able to live in a community where you can trust that when people tell you something, it's the truth. And you want to live in a society where people are capable of taking responsibility for their actions. So from this we get basic principle. Okay, well, what about if we make a decision as a group that even if we feel very angry and aggressive, we won't hurt each other. Even if we desire things that belong to somebody else, we won't take them. Even if we find someone else's partner attractive, we won't act or speak in any unbecoming way towards them, try to create any inappropriate relationship to someone who's already married or has a partner. That we will tell the truth, that we won't take drink and drugs which undermine our sense of responsibility and clarity of mind. This is the basis of morality. It's the foundation for communities that are worth living in, that give us a sense of security and happiness. Now, many religions in the world can be defined as belief systems. We often refer to them as the great faiths. Buddhism is a different kind of religion. It's a belief. It's not a belief system. It's an education system. So when people go to Buddhist monasteries, they often ask to take what they call the 5 precepts from the monks in a formal ceremony. And the form of the ceremony is that people say, for instance, Pāṇātipātā Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyāmi. Now, panatipata means not to kill. It means to kill. Veramani means to refrain. But the two last words are very interesting. Sikkhapadam means a training rule, and Savadhyana means to undertake. So it doesn't mean to say, I vow not to kill, but it says, I take on the restraint or refraining from harming others as a training rule, as a way of educating my conduct. So this is a different way of looking at ethics, morality, not looking at it as a group of commandments that one keeps out of obedience and love of God, but taking on training rules, ways of educating our conduct. Now, in the practice, search for happiness, we have to educate ourselves. Educate our ability to appreciate the higher forms of happiness, ability to experience them. And in this process, what is most essential is that sense of self-respect, or in the modern Western idiom, self-esteem. So, the Buddha is saying that giving, sharing, and a moral life are the foundations of self-esteem. So, with the morality, it means it must come from you. You must see the value of every single one of these training rules. And the idea is of establishing certain boundaries for yourself voluntarily, seeing the value of them, seeing the suffering inherent in not having those boundaries, and then training yourself, educating yourself to be able to live within those boundaries. And the more to which you are able to consistently conduct yourself within those boundaries, then the more the sense of self-respect, self-esteem will arise, and of course happiness, the basic kind of happiness, will surely follow. Now, in that training, we are making use of a basic human ability. It's a wonderful ability, and one that, again, is often overlooked or undervalued. And that is the intention not to do. Now, if you compare human beings with animals, so obviously you couldn't ever teach a cat to feel sorry for a mouse and not to chase after a mouse, because a cat is a creature of its instincts. We, as human beings, also have instincts, natural instincts, but we can, in certain circumstances, say, no, in that particular area, I'm not going to follow my instincts. And this is something which is practical, reasonable, not beyond anybody to do, and I'm sure all of you do it every day. So this ability not to do certain things is something which gives shape and meaning to life. And for those of you who paint or write, or some of you, I'm sure you'll have noticed that often what you don't put into the article or into the painting, or what you leave, is often as important as what you put in. So, to give an example of how keeping precepts is a form of education or training, let's take the simple case of a mosquito biting your wrist. Now, the purely instinctive, automatic, unthinking reaction to pain is go away as quickly as possible. So kill the mosquito. But in the case that you've taken on this precept very sincerely, and you're trying to train your conduct using it, say the mosquito bites you, and then at that moment you realize what you're doing, and you stop, Now that's a very interesting thing to happen. You stop, you don't follow the instinct, and the moment you stop, there's a small moment of awakening. And that small moment of awakening is one in which it is, as it were, you drive a wedge in between an intention and its expression. Usually intention results in expression almost immediately. So you need a tool to be able to pull these two apart, intention and expression. And the recollection, or in Buddhist terminology, mindfulness of a precept, which you take non-voluntarily, is the technique, is the mechanism, if you like, which stops you and allows you to make a choice. Do I really want to do this? Do I want to kill this mosquito or not? Is it consistent with my ideals and my beliefs or not? You see? So we're going to be on beliefs, and we're getting to like the nitty-gritty of how you actually deal with your mind in daily life. What tools can you make use of? And so recollection, mindfulness of a precept in matters of conduct and speech is the basic tool. So you stop and you say, well, do I really want to know? I don't have to kill it, just brush it away. Now, although in most spiritual matters you notice that inner education, transformation, evolution will naturally affect your conduct. Thoughts of loving kindness and compassion will naturally express in how you relate to others, how you speak to others. But there is a parallel complementary practice from the outside inwards, which means that if you maintain that training of conduct, let's say in this occasion with creatures like mosquitoes and ants and scorpions and things that you don't like or frighten you, but every time that intention to kill that creature is not acted upon, then the power of that intention weakens, and the power of the non-harming intention is strengthened. And so if you consistently, continually refrain from killing the mosquito, you'll notice over a period of time that the intention to kill the mosquito disappears or virtually never arises. And with the absence of that intention to harm, feelings of loving kindness start to arise naturally. So compassion, loving kindness arising through consistently following this practice of refraining from certain kinds of conduct. So sila, or the precepts, is creating harmony in families, in communities, in societies. But on the internal level, it's creating this sense of self-respect, self-esteem, and reducing greatly the sense of guilt and thoughts just going over and over and over about things that you've said and done in the past. Now, for the higher levels of spiritual development and the happiness which is concomitant with them, you have to be a good friend to yourself. You have to really want yourself, desire for yourself to experience the higher forms of happiness. If you think that you're a bad person, you don't really deserve to be happy, then you're never going to really pursue those practices which will produce that kind of happiness. So this is the foundation that we need to develop. Okay, the intention to refrain from certain kinds of action will certainly increase the amount of happiness in your life, and will have a very positive effect on relationships with people around you. There is, by the way, another point that the Buddha pointed out that if you are, let's say, pure in your conduct, in the sense of refraining from killing and stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, drinking drugs and so on, but because of that you start to feel that you're somehow superior to someone who doesn't, then the Buddha says your morality is soiled, it's impure. So purity is not just a matter of keeping all the rules or the training rules, but it's also your attitude towards yourself and others at the same time. So it's quite a subtle thing. Okay, there still remains a problem. You can still suffer a lot, even if you're kind and generous and you lead a moral life, because the most important determinant of your happiness in life is your mind, of course. And so we have to find a way of dealing with our mind and our emotions, and finding ways of reducing the power of negative emotions and promoting the power of positive emotions. Again, this is not, it doesn't, people say, oh, I'm this kind of person and that kind of person, I'm very confused, I get very jealous, I've got a bad temper, as if these things are sort of given and that you're always going to be that way. But these things are just habits. And things that you've cultivated. So if you cultivate your mind in a different way, there's no reason why you cannot make quite radical changes in your life. And this is, in fact, a principle which is being more and more accepted in the scientific community, particularly through the advances in technology producing MRI machines and so on, that the old scientific dogma that the brain is a fixed thing and the mind is an epiphenomenon of the brain, it's not a real thing. It's just a sort of a product of the chemicals and neurons and things sort of in your brain. That belief has sort of gone out the window now, because they've discovered something they call neuroplasticity. It shows that your brain is changing all the time. If you meditate a lot, your brain starts working in a different way. Or even if you learn to play a musical instrument, your brain changes. So it's not that the brain is producing the mind, which is the other way around, or perhaps they affect each other. So definitely you can make changes, but it has to be done in a systematic way. It's not something that you can do. They call neuroplasticity. It shows that your brain is changing all the time. If you meditate a lot, your brain starts working in a different way. Or even if you learn to play a musical instrument, your brain changes. Practical to make a decision. Okay, no matter how angry I am, I'm not going to express that physically or verbally. I'm not going to hit somebody, I'm not going to swear at them. But you can't make a decision, I'm not going to get angry with them, I'm just going to be forgiving and kind and loving all day. That's beyond the sphere of intention. Here we have to do the sphere of mental development. And again, the primary engine of this development is we call mindfulness. And this is the ability to make the mind clear, bright and present, learning to abandon, to let go of all the unnecessary thinking in your mind. So if you were to look at what you think about every day, from the moment you get up to the time you go to bed, I think that you would have to agree, somewhat sadly, that probably 90% of your thoughts are basically junk, and don't add anything to the quality of your life at all. Sometimes it's just thinking, just for the sake of thinking, just to have something or other going on. Another time, as a reaction to a sense of boredom or unhappiness of some kind, they're trying to remember some pleasant experience in the past or some pleasant experience anticipated in the future as a way of making yourself feel better, sort of self-medication. But there is an alternative to this, and this is the ability to be present, and when the mind is very sharp, there's a recognition of these unwholesome or negative thought patterns arising in the mind. And usually that mere moment of awareness is sufficient for that thought pattern to pass away. And bringing the mind back to the present moment again and again and again, then our attitude and relationship to thought and mental activity starts to change, because it's not quite so compelling as it used to be. You don't believe in your thinking so much. You see, it's quite insubstantial. The moment you turn the light of awareness on it, it tends just to pass away. So the ability to do that in your daily life is going to be dependent to a certain extent on adopting certain meditative exercises where you seek to develop this power of mindfulness like a muscle. Just like you do particular exercises to develop your physical body and the health of the body, you need to develop these mental muscles, the mental muscle of mindfulness. So you can take on any number of different meditation objects. One commonly used in Buddhist world is the sensation of the breath. It's a rise that manifests at the end of the nose. It's just an anchor for mindfulness. The mind wanders off, bring it back, wanders off, bring it back, very, very patiently, gently, but firmly. And when you try to do that, first experience is quite sobering, because you realize what an absolute mess your mind is, and how completely out of control it is. But if you don't become discouraged and you stick at it, after a while the mind starts to calm down, and there start to be gaps between the mental activity, and then you start to experience a sense of calm and peace. And this is the next level of happiness. This is the happiness of inner peace. It's difficult, certainly it's very difficult, it's an incredible challenge, and there are all kinds of obstacles and challenges which will arise. For instance, most people experience incredible mental agitation when they first start to calm their minds. After a while, the mental agitation starts to diminish, and then often people get very sleepy, and often people will go between these two poles of agitation and sleepiness for quite some time. But this is something that's going on anyway. If you're ever if you've been on a plane or anywhere on a long journey, you notice that people have to have something to do. So read a newspaper, read a book, watch a movie, eat something. As soon as there's nothing to do, what do people do? Fall asleep. So mostly we know movement, thought, agitation, and sleep or dullness. So the effort here is to develop that ability to dwell in the middle space where not thinking necessarily, but not dull or not sleepy. Then sometimes there can be strong feelings of anger and aggression, strong feelings of lust and desire, all kinds of doubts and worries arising in the mind. And so these are the we call the maras, or the the obstacles in this form of spiritual development. But these are things that must be overcome. And when the mind lets go of these different hindrances and negative emotions, then the peace that arises brings with it a great deal of bliss and a form of happiness that is so obviously and incontrovertibly superior to anything that one's ever experienced, that one has a new relationship with the other forms of happiness. And I think on a social level, dealing with social problems and young people, drugs and all these things, that if people are pursuing very harmful ways of experiencing pleasure, you can't just take those away from them without being able to provide them with some alternative. And teaching children from a young age to be able to deal with their emotions and to be able to let go of negative thoughts and thought patterns and to develop that inner peace and clarity, I think is the best way to be able to vaccinate children from the kinds of pressures and temptations that come through in adolescence. Okay, so from peace, but there's something beyond peace, because peace is still a condition. It's still something that arises and passes away, and if someone's been meditating a lot, then they get very ill, very sick, or all kinds of things can happen, and that peace can still disappear, and it's not yet a true refuge. So when the mind is peaceful, then we use that peaceful mind to look very closely at the nature of body and mind in order to uproot the attachment to the physical body, to feelings, to perceptions, to thoughts, to emotions, to sense consciousness as being me and being mine, because that's the underlying root cause of suffering or lack of true happiness. This attachment to things that are not substantial, not really who we are as being me, as being mine. Have me and mine, then you automatically have a separation of what's not me, what's not mine, and various kinds of suffering arising. So when the mind is calm and clear and bright and sharp and blissful, but still has a certain amount of mental activity, then using that mind to focus on present experience in order to see how every single part of our body and mind is arising and passing away as a natural phenomenon. It's a river, it's a flow. There's not one, you can't point to any single one thing and say, that's who I am. And this is where there's a real kind of liberating experience. And through that liberating experience, one experiences a highest form of happiness, a form of wisdom, liberation. And it's very difficult to talk about this. It's similar to, let's say, perfect health. I mean, how can you define health other than to say what's not there? You don't have this illness, you don't have that illness. But to speak about health in a positive idiom is very difficult or impossible. And similarly, the highest form of happiness is the happiness of the complete absence of suffering and its cause, and something which is within the reach of every one of us, man, woman, child. It's a matter of following this education process, one which we're using in our external affairs, conduct, relationship between the world around us, using this essentially this power of refraining and training ourselves with mindfulness, training the mind, the emotions, using mindfulness, looking within, finding skillful means to promote qualities such as contentment, loving kindness, compassion, patience, and so on, and finding skillful means to prevent the negative emotions from arising, and then finding skillful means and techniques to overcome, to let go of, to abandon the negative emotions that have arisen. And then using the mind, which is fortified and strengthened with peace, to look more and more closely at the nature of our body and minds, to develop this liberation from wrong understanding, assumptions that we've made through influences from our culture, from people around us, just through conditioning of many lifetimes, and developing a clear, penetrative understanding of the way things are. So I've spoken at length, way longer than I intended to. I hope it hasn't been too long for you, and I'd like to end the talk at this point.